little sweetheart.
They can't do nothing because I tap dance.
This is WVCR 88.3 FM, The Saint. You are listening to Calling Out Controversy, featuring hosts Andrew Hecht and Justin Kenyon. Hey everybody, welcome to Calling Out Controversy. It's Andrew Hecht, and with me as always,
Justin Kenyon.
And here we are, Summer of Rights, 8th Amendment, Cruel and Unusual Punishment. We're going to be asking the questions about whether or not solitary confinement and the death penalty should be considered cruel and unusual punishment.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's a heavy subject.
Leroy Jenkins!
And that was a big shout out to Monty. You know him from the, what is the name of his show?
I think it's just Monty.
No, it's 88.3 The Saint. Afternoon Escape. It's Afternoon Escape. It's with Monty.
I love how you had to do the jingle to remember it.
88.3 The Saint. Afternoon Escape. Monty.
I'm just used to seeing Monty on the board out here, so.
Just Monty. Dude, if you ever met Monty in real life, he does not talk like that, but he does watch The Bachelor. Now, he's given us a lot of promos last week, so we figured a little inside joke, the Leroy Jenkins meme coming back from World of Warcraft, just for Monty. Right before we're about to get really somber for the next 50 minutes.
Oh, was he a World of Warcraft guy?
No, I actually showed it to him because I was like, have you ever seen this video? Because somebody else in the meme world had made a fake tweet from Donald Trump just saying Leroy Jenkins.
They do that with everybody. They also do that with Hillary Clinton all the time, too.
It was the day after he told the squad to go back where they came from, which was very idiotic and stupid.
You could have used better words.
Well, no, I mean, what he said was mildly racist and rather ignorant, but doesn't mean I like the squad. It just means that you call it when it needs calling out controversy. But he shouldn't have said that. That was wrong, and disrespectful and distasteful.
I just don't think he thought before it came out of his mouth.
Well, usually most people on Twitter don't think, including the president. But, it was something that was wrong to say. And that's the only current event we have. Oh, yeah, and Boris Johnson's running the UK.
The Trump of England is now prime minister.
He used to be a comedian. Could you believe that would be like if Dennis Miller became our president. Or if Adam Carolla became our president.
Well, we have a reality TV show host as our president, and we've also had an actor as our president.
Yeah, but he was never funny. And Reagan was funny like one time.
Well, Reagan used to do jokes, and Reagan was also more stoic.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever saw him reacting to a balloon going off at one of his rallies.
I think I've seen
the balloon goes off and he goes, "Missed me," right after his assassination attempt. Oh, man, America. All right, time to get serious, though. It's time to get serious. We're going to take a break halfway through, so we're going to break it up into two parts. This is the way we're going to handle it. Justin and I did research on two separate things. He did research on the death penalty. I did research on solitary confinement. And we're both going to talk about, in brief, with the help of a lot of clips, whether or not they should be considered cruel and unusual punishment.
This will be very similar to our past episode on the Fifth Amendment.
Yeah, in terms of how we're presenting the evidence. It's going to be us presenting clips, courtesy of YouTube, courtesy of reliable news sources, and other educational videos that we found that we thought were helpful in a way to produce a quality show for you listeners out there. So you want to go first? You want me to go first? We should rock, paper, scissors for it.
Why don't you go first?
All right, ready? No,
okay.
Let's do it. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Okay, I won.
Okay.
It was okay. So what just happened was it was scissor, and then paper, rock. And I had the paper, so I won. So I go first. All right. I'm just trying to lighten the mood, before
This is like the episode to dedicate to Monty.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just we're about to talk about a lot of death and insanity, so if we could just be happy for a minute.
This is your escape into the somberness.
Yeah, I just I don't want to start the show off as sad as it's eventually gonna get.
Let's just get to the sadness.
Yeah, let's just get to it. So first up, what I found was a clip, pretty much outlining I think it's the New Mexico Secretary of Justice, maybe
something like that. Yeah, probably their equivalent of an attorney general or something.
Yeah, it's Mexico's
New
Mexico's Secretary of Corrections. His name's Greg Marcantel.
So he basically runs the prisons in the state.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Secretary of Corrections, Greg Marcantel, New Mexico. He was a former police officer, then I believe also a corrections officer. It goes over his history very briefly. And he decides he wants to spend 2 full days, 48 hours, inside a correctional facility in solitary confinement, undercover, in order to see what prisoners really go through. Now, caveat, when you see this on YouTube, if you click the link that it's going to be posted with, he gets an iPod. That's a really, really big difference.
Yeah.
He's also made comfortable enough. He's obviously not being harassed by guards, if that does happen in New Mexico. I'm not saying it does, but it has been known to happen in prisons around the country. He's also not guilty of a crime. He's also not already been in jail for X amount of time. He went straight into solitary confinement for 2 days. That's all he did. So there's a bit of a biased answer, in my opinion, because he doesn't go through the same things that other criminals go through, and I'm all for just punishment. And there's another person in your research that we found that I relate to very heavily. But why don't we just take a look at this clip?
Let's take a look.
Looking at prisoner 106, on the books as a dangerous armed robber. He is preparing to enter what many call hell on earth. Solitary confinement. Before you meet its residents, just listen to them.
This is prison. We're not here for being nice.
I've seen guys resort to cutting themselves and killing themselves,
As prisoner 106 is moved into the unit,
I don't know that I have ever felt as vulnerable as I do right now.
the thing almost nobody here knows is that this inmate is actually the Secretary of Corrections for the state of New Mexico, Greg Marcantel, a former cop who spent a career putting away bad guys. He's now going to try to spend 48 hours living among the worst of the worst. This surveillance footage shows what these men are capable of if they get loose.
This is a public safety issue.
So why is the secretary willing to put himself through this? He's decided he wants to reform the state's use of solitary because most of these inmates will end up right back on our streets.
We're sending people back to our neighborhoods worse than when they came.
As the clock starts running on his 48-hour lockdown, the secretary settles into his 12-by-7 concrete cell. Level 6 is divided up into 3 separate units, housing a total of 282 inmates. In here for crimes ranging from rape to armed robbery to murder. Combined, these men have killed 138 people. In cell 111 is Freddie Munoz.
This is my home right here. For good or bad, this is it.
Growing up, Munoz wanted to be an astronaut, but at age 13, he got caught up in gangs.
How many murders did you commit? 2 murders.
Because of his violent past and his gang affiliation, prison officials have kept him in a cell like this every day for the past 10 years. These 4 walls are all he's got. He knows every crack, every inch of peeling paint.
What does that do to your head?
It is perpetual misery. It's ennui, it's monotony, it's repetition.
He says the only way to keep it together in here is to establish a strict routine, a sort of imitation of life.
I exercise, I read a lot. If I didn't have books, I probably would have already gone insane.
A few cells away, Daniel Herrera. He's also in solitary because of his gang affiliation. He's 23 years old and serving a sentence for kidnapping.
This is where we live. I mean, right here you can see the width of our rooms.
At our request, he shows us one of the tricks of solitary. This is called fishing.
A fishing line to communicate with neighbors and stuff like that. You send it to your neighbor. So that's how we fish and get things from one cell to another in here without getting caught or getting in trouble.
Back in Secretary Marcantel's cell, 9 hours in, he brushes his teeth and gets ready for a long night in a strange and hidden world. Officer Joseph Vishaway makes his morning rounds. It's chow time.
No, sir. Give some yelling.
When collecting the food trays, Officer Vishaway makes sure nobody has broken off a piece of plastic which could be used to create a weapon.
Is this a dangerous job?
It takes a certain type of person to do it. We're working inside the lion's cage with the lion.
To keep themselves safe, the officers follow rigid protocols. For example, there's a strip search for weapons or contraband every time they take an inmate out to the yard, which is known as the rec cage.
Locked down 23 hours a day, sitting reminiscing on how my life was stripped away.
And coming back is equally coordinated.
Just bringing this inmate from the rec pen into his unit, there's a choreography. Inmates get an hour a day outside their cell. Being walked back to your cell by 2 guards is probably the only human contact you get all day.
It's 24 hours into his stay, and the confinement is starting to get to the secretary. He's trying to pass the time by working out, but there's only so much of that you can do. Claustrophobia is setting in.
I felt like the cell was kind of squeezing down on me.
He is getting a taste of why this form of punishment has become so controversial. Not only can it be 3 times as expensive as regular incarceration, but critics call it legalized torture. We are social animals. We're built for interaction. Take that away, and critics say inmates can literally lose their minds. But many corrections officials say it's a necessary tool to control a dangerous population. As a prime example, they point to an inmate like Nathaniel Stein.
I don't think I've ever interviewed somebody before who's being restrained by 2 officers. Would you consider yourself a dangerous man?
No.
However, he is in solitary for viciously attacking a corrections officer. Why did you do that?
That's a tough question. It was just a situation. I don't know why.
I do notice that when you are fessing up to something, you do smile.
I don't know why I do that.
The signal to me is that you don't feel badly about it.
Do I feel bad for the things I don't really feel bad for the things I've done, you know what I mean?
On the flip side, there are inmates like Freddie Munoz, who despite the severity of his crimes, has been a model inmate and renounced his gang affiliation. Munoz is now one of a select few handpicked to move out of solitary and into the general population of the prison as part of the Secretary's plan to reduce the population in solitary.
To be able to go outside without being handcuffed and restrained every day, I think that would be very good for me.
Any more than 30 days is torture. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. There is a such thing as evil. And it's up to me to make sure that not only am I protecting other inmates from them, but I'm also protecting my staff from them.
Days later, Freddie Munoz, Daniel Herrera, and 6 other inmates are brought out of level 6 solitary in preparation for an eventual return to the general prison population.
So, Justin, what'd you think?
I mean, it definitely was, as you said, a biased viewpoint.
Yeah.
Because you do know he kind of expected to be put in solitary confinement. He also had an iPod, which I think they don't even get something like a TV or like anything else like that. So then also it was kind of interesting how he went through it for 2 days, and kind of like a hotel version of solitary confinement.
Well, he was in level 6, which is in most prisons as high or second or third to as high as you can go.
Yeah.
I think it maxes out as 7 or 8. But
he made it look comfortable for himself.
Well, he was in correctional clothes. He was in a beanie, and I think the biggest difference is he had music, whereas to my knowledge, most people in solitary don't get phones or TVs or radios. I think there's a person next who explains a little bit more what it's like from a criminal perspective. After prison, I think it's called After Prison Life or After Prison World.
Maybe, but the most interesting thing about that was that he came out still supporting solitary confinement.
Yeah, well, he came out supporting it, but he then released 6 people from solitary confinement.
Yeah.
So it's for him, he says that it's to be used under like specific circumstances, like when there's no
kind of like a case of precaution,
when there's no other alternatives. Is kind of what he comes down on.
Precaution.
But he doesn't think it should be banned. It's After Prison Show is the next one.
Okay.
And this is a prisoner who goes by Danny in the video, and Danny explains what it's like living in solitary confinement, breaks it down psychologically, the levels, how often you're allowed to see other people, and stuff like that from a prisoner's perspective, which is really different. And I would argue more important because that's the person who's being subjected to it. Again, we're not talking about people who are committing like small crimes. We're talking about people who are committing really heinous crimes. Did you find out
what crime Danny was put away for?
I think it's in another video with him in it, but considering he spent 17 years in solitary,
probably something very nefarious.
Well, he was already in prison, then he did 17 years in solitary, so I'm assuming murder. That's the only one that gets up there for 20 plus. Maybe armed robbery in a certain state, or rape, or something like that. I mean, I don't...
Or he could have done something in jail if he was already in
jail. Or he
right?
could have extended his sentence. That's coming up soon after the conversations like that. But why don't we just take a listen to what Danny has to say about it.
Out of the 24 years that I served in Walpole State Prison, I probably did like 17 years, 18 years in segregation. And I did long stretches. There were short times, but the longest one was 10 years I spent down there. So it was the last time in 10 block. From there, I served the other 7 in DDU. The crazy thing about it was I started out with 1 year, and it turned into a big monster, 7 years. And pretty much, as I explained on the last one, I was falsely labeled as a reason to justify for them to take me from one segregation to put me to a level 7. Because I left from a level 6 to a higher level. The purpose why I refused is because I was having trouble mentally in dealing with segregation for so long. And really there, you hardly ever see a counselor comes by. He comes by, he'll spend 2 minutes with you, want to give you all the medication you want, but it doesn't solve the problem mentally, because what happens, your mind deteriorates little by little. You forget the days, you forget the time. Sometimes I had trouble, I didn't even remember who I was. It was really frustrating for me in that closed environment, because it's like a closet. And when they took the TVs away, it was even more difficult. From the 10 years that I served in 10 block, I went next door, and it's called Disciplinary Department Unit, DDU. It's underneath the ground. I served 7 there. Actually, I started, like I said, 1 year, and it turned to 7 years. That unit was built deliberately to break people down mentally, to break them down. There was a special report from a doctor from California who came, a psychiatrist. He's a psychiatrist for the United States State Prisons on segregation. He made it clear to the judge that if a man even stays here 3 days, he can lose his mind. He said it's a dangerous place, because they filed a lawsuit against it. But for some reason, the courts didn't want to intervene. They said that when it comes to security, the Department of Correction can do whatever they want. And so I refused for that reason to go there, because I was having mental problem. Today I've been diagnosed with that, so it just didn't start today or 2001. I had this way before I went to 10 block. And unfortunately, it just got worse when I went to 10 block for them 10 years, and it got even worse more and 7 years in DDU. That unit is built deliberately to break people down mentally and emotionally and physically. I probably weighed 90 pounds from 205 pounds that I came from population. The food, they serve very little. They play mind games with food. If they didn't like you, they didn't feed you. If you said something wrong, they didn't feed you. When you first there for the first month, they give you 1 visit, 1 phone call. The second month, they give you 2 phone calls, 2 visits, and they give you a radio. You can hardly get anything in the radio there anyways, probably 1 or 2 stations. Then 3 months, you'll get 3 visits and 3 phone calls and a TV. And then on the 4th month, it's the highest that you get is 4 visits, 4 phone calls. The problem is with that is if you said something wrong once again, or you got a disciplinary shot, meaning misbehavior for some reason, they'll take everything away from you. You'll wait 2 months and then they start giving it to you. It's like a modification behavior type of tactic. It's a way to control people and their behavior. Staff, they don't really care. You don't see them at all, and when they do, they come geared up. They come all suited up. And just because it's a level 7, it's a high security, you cannot be removed out of that cell without cuffs and shackles. Anytime, even if you're gonna go see the nurse, you're escorted by 4. If individuals act up, they have this special chair and they tie you down to it like a 3-point restraint, and they pick you up and carry you. Now, I have heard of stories, and I didn't personally see it, but I've heard of stories where officers didn't like the inmate. While carrying him, they let him fall down the stairs. And some has died behind that. There's been a lot of deaths there, and a lot of it was done by guards doing it to inmates, because really the inmate has no contact with nobody. You have no contact with nobody, not even another inmate. In fact, to talk to the guy next door, you got to scream so loud because the way the walls are designed is soundproof. The doors are soundproof. When you go out to the kennels, now let me explain what a kennel. You ever seen a dog kennel where they put dogs in? Well, that's how our yard is. It's probably about this wide, and I would say it's a good 10 feet long, and you walk back and forth. They have these screens where you can talk to the guy next door, but you don't know who you're talking to because they block it out. It's a green screen so that you don't have no eye contact with nobody. Pretty much you don't have any contact with nobody at all. When you're there, you know you're isolated. You're isolated. You even can feel your family isolated. I mean, even your mail. Sometimes you get mail and they don't give it to you for 3 or 4 weeks later, sometimes 2 or 3 months. Most of the time they throw it away. You don't know if your mail is going out. You don't know nothing. In other words, you're like, it's designed to, how can I say it the right word, where when you don't know what's going on, it dislocates your thoughts, and that's what it's designed to do. It really is a dangerous place, and it's really not healthy.
So obviously, Danny's coming down against it. The After Prison show
years in it
is apparently a chronology of what he's doing. Yeah, because I think he references at the beginning that he, what do you call it, had done a previous episode of the After Prison show.
Yeah, I think he does.
So if you go on YouTube, there's going to be a link to that video. Got to click on After Prison show. You can find out more about Danny, and what his real story is. He mentions he was falsely labeled as a threat and got an extra 6 years to that last 7-year stretch.
Rough time.
Yeah, he's 24 years, I think is what it was. Before the video, it was around 20, but I think he confirms that it's 24 years at the very beginning. So there you go. Lastly, we had a video we found by Infographics. Infographics talks about it from an international perspective and kind of what it means both in the United States, the UK, and in Central and South America. Who's in there, kind of what they did to deserve it, and also what people have done to survive that condition. One of my favorite examples, which actually came up in this one, is Charles Bronson, who's now called Charles Salvador. If you ever watch the movie, great movie. If you ever look him up, amazing artist. Like, amazing artist. Takes after Salvador Dali. He changed his name. His real name's Peter, but he went by Charlie Bronson because of the actor, and then he changed his name to Charles Salvador because he learned to cope with his anger through painting. And I had an opportunity to buy one of his pieces years ago for like $500 and I didn't take it, and I looked back like a year ago.
Something you wish you did?
Yeah, do you know why?
Why?
Because one of the pieces that I was going to buy for $500 when I had the money, and I was like holding out on it because I didn't think it was going to be responsible, went for $10,000. A private donor who wanted him out of jail donated to the Free Charles Salvador website and bought all of their artwork for like $20,000. There's only like 5 pieces.
You really missed out then.
Yeah, I'm livid because he's never going to draw another piece from that series again. That series is now a collector's series. So I have to be a millionaire to go get that painting again. I'm going way off topic, but this is how much I enjoy Charles Salvador. His pieces are grotesque, they're awkward, they're violent, but they're beautiful at the same time. They are really interesting pieces, and I highly suggest you go look up some of that stuff. But I digress. We're going to roll the clip now, and, we're going to take a break after that. So let's just finish this out, and it's going to roll right into sponsorship. So you've been listening to WVCR 88.3 FM, The Saint, as always, calling out controversy. You know the deal. We'll be back after this clip, after these messages.
First of all, the amount of time you spend in what some people call the box is important when we're discussing how you might get through it. Spending one day in there can't be compared to spending 1 year in there. Some inmates find themselves doing a temporary stay in solitary for what authorities call their own good. Maybe guards believed they were a danger to themselves and had to be under constant supervision, or other inmates might have hurt someone else and needed to be immediately separated from other people. Then there are the high-profile prisoners, perhaps prisoners who have great power still even on the inside, and often they can spend a long time in solitary. We might look at Mexican drug kingpins such as Felix Gallardo, aka the Godfather, or Joaquin Archibaldo El Chapo Guzman Lorea, who have complained about being in their cells all day, every day. Look at former Aryan Brotherhood leader and prison guard killer Thomas Edward Silverstein, who's been in solitary in the US since 1983. In the UK, you have Robert Maudsley, aka Hannibal the Cannibal, who's been in solitary almost 40 years. He'd killed 3 prisoners while locked up, and the stories were gruesome. The media writes he spends 23 hours a day in the cage, a cell made of bulletproof glass which was built specifically for him in 1983, after he was officially classed Britain's most dangerous prisoner. But as you probably know, it's not always inmate or guard killers that end up in solitary, and some less dangerous people have spent a long time locked in those cells. We might look at the story of Albert Woodfox, sometimes called the man who spent the most years in solitary in American prison history. The former Black Panther, part of what became known as the Angola Three, was arrested in 1971 for armed robbery. Prior to that, he had been fighting racism in Angola, Louisiana, and ended up in prison there. We should add that he certainly was no angel, having been involved in other robberies. In 1972, he was accused of killing a prison guard along with 2 others, and he would end up spending the next 43 years in solitary. Amnesty International writes, state authorities kept Albert in a cell measuring 6 by 9 feet, or 2 by 3 meters, for 23 hours a day. He was allowed 1 hour of exercise a day in a yard, but this was on his own, and he remained shackled. Even though the murder conviction was overturned 3 times, he remained in solitary. We won't get into it, but the evidence against him was weak. Very weak. Each time the conviction was overturned and authorities retried him, and then in 2015, Louisiana state authorities were barred from retrying him ever again. And in the end, all 3 men had their convictions overturned, but Woodfox was the last to leave prison. While this story is about how to deal with solitary, we tell you this to emphasize that the practice can be overused, and it can be used to abuse prisoners. Now let's look at how a man stayed in this box 43 years of his life. None of us can likely be put into this context in our own lives. Just imagine if you're alone now, not being able to leave that room for a few days. 43 years in a tiny cell, perhaps as an innocent man. How could someone get through that? On top of that, Woodfox told the media that he was taken into the worst cell in solitary, a place called the Dungeon. He also said his guards would regularly beat him there. Fortunately, he was allowed to read books in there. This, the BBC tells us, was one thing that kept him sane. He taught himself criminal and civil law, and the BBC writes that he would teach other inmates when he had his hour out each day. While Amnesty said he spent his hour alone, we're guessing he could communicate with others through a fence, which is often the case for segregated prisoners. He explained the best moment of being locked up was teaching another man to read. All of the things we went through and all of the pain, the suffering, the struggles, the victories here and there, none of that compared to the feeling I got when a man who could not read or write at all could sit across from me and read a book. The New Yorker tells us that he tried to control his surroundings as much as was possible. He kept the light on all the time and covered it when he slept his 3 hours. He ate little and slept little, and this adapting to a strict regime that gave him some feeling of autonomy. We wanted the security people to think that they were dealing with superhumans, he told the New Yorker. Before I let them take something from me, I deny it from myself. He wrote many letters to family, pen pals, to the Black Panthers, to people fighting racism and inequality on the outside. He was described by social workers as respectful, positive, cooperative, and neat. Yet every time he came up against a disciplinary panel, he was denied re-entry into the main population. Then you have Charles Bronson, often called Britain's most notorious prisoner. He was only charged at first with armed robbery, but due to his erratic, often violent behavior, as well as taking hostages inside, he's been in prison since 1988. Prior to that, he'd been locked up for over a decade. Much of this time had been spent in solitary confinement. As you may have seen in the movie about him, he didn't exactly get through this time in solitary with ease. He wrote once, "Years of solitary have left me unable to face the light for more than a few minutes. It gives me terrible headaches if I do. Years of loneliness in small cells have left me paranoid about people invading my space. I now can't stand people getting too close and crowding me." But he did write a book on keeping fit in solitary confinement. He was once a bare-knuckle fighter and so enjoyed keeping fit. The book released in 2002 and was called Solitary Fitness. He claimed to do at least 2,000 push-ups a day and that his confinement was spent mostly on building his body. We read many reviews on his book and it seems he was onto something, with his exercises requiring zero equipment, working for most people. In short, if you're in solitary, work out and try to improve by the week to give yourself goals. We found another man who spent a lot of time in solitary, and for him, using his imagination was key to survival. He imagined all the interactions he had with people throughout his life and imagined alternate realities where he did something different. So in a way, creating a fiction around all of his memories. "I used to lie in bed with my eyes closed," he said, "thinking about my past, thinking about my future, planning for the future. Some of it was based on reality and the other borderline fantasy." Another inmate from Texas called Michael Jewell said he did the same. He would imagine situations and how he might react. He said it made him a better person because he was continually noticing problems in his past behavior and he knew the best way to react for a positive outcome. "When I opened my eyes and stood, I would feel refreshed and even invigorated," he said. Psychologists tell us that when a person is robbed of sensory stimulation of the things around them, their brains get active and the imagination is more fecund. This, however, can be negative for people who have mental problems. For a long time, it's been stated that many people who end up in solitary have such problems, and they only worsen when trapped in a small cell. A psychologist told the BBC that some people do go insane inside these cells. They have isolation panic and their identity becomes fragmented. That's an extreme case of somebody's identity becoming so badly damaged and essentially destroyed that it's impossible for them to reconstruct it, he said. In another article, one person said that you really must take control over your own space. That means keeping everything spotless as well as keeping yourself very clean. Own your area and take care of yourself. This even means doing your nails daily, just by making them the same size or finding a way to make them smoother. You need routine and you must stick to it.
And welcome back. Just to wrap up, we were talking about solitary confinement in the United States and a little bit abroad and whether or not it constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. We heard testimony from a prisoner, from a corrections secretary,
a government official pretty much,
and an infographics breakdown of what it's like to survive or what people have to do to survive mentally in those conditions. I also have attached on YouTube in the links below 4 articles involving solitary confinement, and I've read them all. We want to get to the death penalty, so I'm going to summarize it real quick. In my opinion, I do not think solitary confinement constitutes cruel and unusual punishment unless they are doling out solitary confinement or prison segregation for unjust reasons. I very much agree with the corrections secretary at the beginning of the show that people need to be punished justly, and if you're causing a ruckus inside prison in the general public or population or whatever,
yeah.
Population, if you're in Gen Pop and you're causing a ruckus and whatnot, you need to be segregated. You need to be taken out and taught a lesson. I don't think that people should be there indefinitely. There's only one state in the entire union that could keep people there indefinitely, and it is California.
Surprisingly.
Yeah, really. But you know what? Read the articles yourselves and email us and tell me what you think. We're moving on to Justin's topic. That is the death penalty. Justin, go ahead and take it away, man.
All right, so I'm going to start this off with the death penalty with going on with this map that we found, but it's also going to be in the links below, as you stated, for solitary confinement.
Correct.
So a majority of states pretty much have death penalty on their books, although 4 have a moratorium on it, which means it's still on their books, just that the governor won't do it. And those are California, Colorado, Pennsylvania, and Oregon. Those 4 still have it on their books. It's just that the governor doesn't want to do it. So altogether, that makes 29 states have the death penalty, and 21 don't have it. So more than half have it.
And a moratorium is usually a step towards abolishing, but it just means that as long as that governor is there, it is not in use. And then once that governor leaves, the next governor can take it and put it back in. Or if there's a horrible, tragic event that warrants killing someone as a response, they can take the moratorium off.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe the governor after Newsom in California could bring it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's also two Supreme Court cases that that kind of define who can get the death penalty. So there's Roper v. Simmons, which states that you have to be over the age of 18, pretty much an adult, to be warranted for capital punishment. So if you're in juvenile court, there's no way you're going to be able to get it.
Right. We don't kill kids.
No. And then there's another one, which is Atkins v. Virginia, which basically states that you had to have a certain IQ in order to be capitally punished. Some stated it was around like 60 or 70. It basically depends on where you're getting, I guess, the death penalty in.
It's also worth pointing out that IQ testing is not standard in case trials and also can be misleading.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that they based off IQ with that, but basically they can't give the death penalty to somebody who's mentally retarded.
Yeah, I mean, I think the proper terminology is mentally disabled nowadays.
Okay, why don't we take that part out then?
I'm just messing with you, bud.
Oh, okay.
I don't care.
Yeah, so you can't. So those are some of the outlines of what it's like in the United States. So we have one clip from Channel 4 News, if I'm correct, right, Andrew?
Yeah, Channel 4 in UK. Channel 4 in UK is like their CNN.
Yeah, so we have a clip from that, and we're going to play it now. Now we'll give you kind of more of an onset of what the death penalty culture is like in America right now.
Yep, here we go.
What's the proper method for killing a person?
Texas has certainly had enough practice. And under its big skies, inside the high-security death row unit, another 254 prisoners wait their turn. When the day comes, with any final appeal exhausted, they're taken from their solitary cell to Huntsville Prison's death house, strapped to a gurney and given a lethal injection. It's a process that Texas repeats week on week, month on month, with alarming regularity. But beyond this place, there is every indication that America's willingness to put people to death is waning. Pat Monks is Texan and a Republican, but here's the surprise, he's against the death penalty.
A barbiturate that takes 27 minutes to do is not a proper way to do it. Hanging a person is not a proper way to do it. Electrocution, not a proper way to do it. Guillotine, quick, but not a proper way to do it. How do you properly kill somebody?
He tells other conservatives it costs the state 3 to 5 times more to seek a death penalty than to put somebody away for life. And there's no evidence the threat of it prevents serious crime.
You know, it's not an issue of being tough on crime. Are we right on crime? See? Are we doing the right thing? You know, are we spending taxpayers' money and putting the wrong people on death row? And is it doing the job? You know, is it really doing the job?
In conservative Nebraska, they decided not.
The trend is absolutely clear, and it's high time the state moved away from the barbaric practice of state-sponsored murder.
Last month, it became the first conservative state in 40 years to abolish capital punishment.
Voting yes,
Please. Voting to overturn a veto by the governor and further isolating Texas and its enthusiastic embrace of the death penalty.
What is justice? Is it revenge? Is it retribution? Is it punishment? Is it vengeance?
On the road to Huntsville, the spiritual home of the prison system in Texas, there's a prisoner's graveyard. Many of the headstones bear only numbers, not names. Among those buried here, a scattering of the more than 500 prisoners Texas has put to death in the last 40 years. Huntsville Prison, where the prisoners are executed, is smack bang in the middle of town. Half the town's population is either prison warder or prisoner. Under this watchtower, at the corner of the prison walls, is the place they call the death house.
This is the death house. Right under there's the death chamber, and the executioner's in a little room in the very corner.
Jim Willett talks us around the model of the prison that's the centrepiece of the town's museum. He has intimate knowledge of the death house. As prison warden, he personally oversaw the execution of 89 prisoners. His faith in the system remains unshakable.
I always looked at my job, though, as being a job for the state and a cog in a wheel.
But you're a pretty significant cog in the wheel, weren't you, in the sense that I'm guessing if you're a death row inmate hoping to the very last that this isn't going to happen, then you're going to be the last guy in the room who potentially that inmate is saying to you, I'm innocent, I don't want to die.
The warden and the chaplain would be the last people he could talk to. But I have to say, too, that out of the 89, I never had anybody say anything like that.
He's now warden of the museum that celebrates the Texan history of punishment. Adults pay $5, children under 6 enter free to see displays featuring the hangman's noose, the electric chair and paraphernalia of the first lethal injection.
Why did you move from electric chair to lethal injection?
I believe we were looking for a more humane way to put someone to death.
Now the Supreme Court is set to rule on whether certain lethal injections are humane or in fact death by cruel and unusual punishment. An EU drugs embargo has squeezed supplies, prompting ever more experimental combinations. When Oklahoma added a new drug to its lethal mix, death row inmate Clayton Lockett took 37 minutes to die. But down in Texas, where they deliver an overdose of a single barbiturate, they say they've never had those kinds of problems.
Maybe somebody else has a problem sometimes because they don't do as many as we do in Texas.
And as long as Texas can get the drugs, Jim Willett says there's no reason to believe things will change.
Here in Texas, we're going to tell you that there are certain things that if you commit certain crimes, we're going to consider putting you to death.
And so you think it makes you safer if you have that?
It may make us safer, but I think when you dig deep inside us, it's because we think it's the right thing to do.
So it's right. There's a secret supply of barbiturates and hundreds of prisoners on death row. Supreme Court or no, Texas isn't volunteering to give up its executing habit anytime soon. Kylie Morris, Channel 4 News, Huntsville.
So if that hearing...
To be clear, the proper method to killing a person is any method that gets the job done. What he was actually asking was, what is the most humane method? But the fact that it started with...
kind of a misnomer.
What's the proper method to kill someone? Has probably been the best opening line to any clip we've ever played on this show.
Yeah.
And
it was definitely a little bit of a misnomer, though.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listen, the guy at the Capital Punishment Museum.
Oh, he was my favorite.
He's great. He was just like...
I've never met him, but he's definitely one of my favorite people in this world.
Well, he's
now.
a former warden. And she's like, well, the only person who they can plead innocence to on their deathbed is you and the execution. He goes, yeah, and out of the 90 or 89, out of the 89 people he executed, not a single one of them pled innocence at the last moment. Not a single one. So that's, I don't know, man. I mean, hey, this is going to...
It's also anecdotal, but...
It's all anecdotal because, you know, the people that it happens to don't tend to stick around.
True.
That's kind of the point about the death penalty, Justin.
Well, you know what I was trying to say.
Yeah, no, I got you. But, I mean, listen, the scientific evidence is 100% of people that are put to death die. It's just a matter of how long. Yeah, it's just a matter of how long.
I would have thought there would be like at least a survival rate of 0.2%.
No.
Or, I'm sorry, 33.3333%.
I am not playing Leroy Jenkins right now. Shame on you. But this whole episode is just tragic. It's oh my god, guys, we're sorry. It's just it took a lot out of us to do all this research, and
It's
we're
all
just
for
trying
Monty.
to make light of it. It was actually really sad to go through it and hear a lot of these stories and then pick what made it onto air. Rough one, but
just trying to lighten the mood a little bit.
yeah, we're just trying to have some fun with it. There's nothing really that funny about it, but
All
like
for our
if you don't
mentor,
laugh,
Monty.
yeah, if you don't laugh, if you don't like, you gotta laugh. You gotta
Yeah.
laugh. Otherwise, this just gets sad. But no, back on topic. The whole thing about death penalty, from what you're showcasing, is that people, I think you said it while we were doing the research, people who are against it think with their heart.
Yeah.
People who are for it
Think with their brain.
Think logically, more logically. Like, crime needs to be punished, justice needs to be served. These things are morally.
So probably a better phrasing would be those who are against it are thinking morally, while those who are for it are thinking logically.
I think they're both thinking of it morally, but for different reasons. One's thinking of it from a logical moral perspective. The other one's thinking of it from an emotional moral perspective. Whereas someone's like, I feel bad. We're killing. Killing is wrong. It's always wrong no matter what. And another person's saying killing should be met with other killing. Like, you take a life, you die. That's your consequence.
Kind of an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth kind of thing.
Yeah, and obviously the other side is the eye for the eye leaves the whole world blind. Like, it's two sides. You know what? I think the next clip that you have will probably do better justice than you and I going back and forth about it. So why don't you introduce that one?
Yeah, so this one, it's from, what was the name of the place again? It was the International...
Nope, Jewish Learning Institute.
Jewish Learning Institute. It's basically two professors kind of debating. They're not with each other, but it's kind of just them stating why they're for or against it. And it's kind of eye-opening to see these two debate and say why they're for or against it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I'm agreeing with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of just eye-opening to see like their sides of it and just to see where it leads. So it's kind of just now, why don't we just leave it to you guys to listen to it?
Yeah, it's worth noting, because it's from Jewish Learning Institute, I thought it'd be an interesting point to bring up that Israel as a country has only ever executed one person.
Really? What person?
I want to say Eichmann, the Eichmann trial.
Okay.
From the Nazi regime.
Was that the one they recently made a movie about?
I have no idea. I'm trying to remember his first name.
Was it?
I think it's Adolf Eichmann.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Yeah, Adolf Eichmann.
Isn't it Adolf?
Yeah, Adolf Eichmann is the only person executed. And to their credit, although there's some speculation as to how fair this could possibly be, not a single Ashkenazi Jew was allowed to be a part of the trial. The judges that presided in Israel over the trial were Sephardic. The prosecutor and defense attorney were Sephardic. The jury was Sephardic. Not a single Ashkenazi person was allowed to partake in this trial other than to testify against him directly. And he is the only person to date that Israel has ever executed as a consequence of a criminal act, which was his war crimes.
Yeah, the Holocaust.
Yeah. So that's worth putting out there because it's coming from the Jewish Learning Institute.
Yeah.
Which is not an Israeli thing, but culturally it has some significance.
Yeah.
And this is where you see the cultural divide between two types of thinkers. And it's a great find. Like, really good job, man. So let's listen to it. We're talking too much. Here's the clip.
I'm Robert Blecker. I'm a criminal law professor. I also teach constitutional history at New York Law School. I've spent a couple of thousand hours inside maximum security prisons and on death rows across the United States interviewing convicted killers. And from that experience, I've come to understand that some people simply deserve to die, and we have an obligation to execute them. So in a word, why do I support the death penalty? In a word, justice. In 3 words, they deserve it. I'm a retributivist. I believe in retribution. As a retributivist, for me and for my fellow retributivists, the past counts. It counts independently of the future. So the wrong question to ask us about punishment is, what good will it do? The right question to ask us is, what bad has been done? In the 100 or so murderers whom I've interviewed at length, in depth, to get their life stories and to get them to expound upon the crimes they committed and why they committed, what's emerged for me are two groups who I would say are clearly the worst of the worst of the worst. Remember again, Aristotle says evil lies at the extremes. At one extreme is the cold, callous, wanton killer who feels nothing. I'm thinking about one of the, actually two spray shooters whom I interviewed. Then there's the opposite extreme. I've interviewed and stood near people like Danny Rawling, sadistic serial killers who raped, tortured, and mutilated their victims. And as they describe it in the moments of their doing it, they were very emotionally involved. They weren't cold and callous. They felt thrill and exhilaration. These people deserve to die, and we have an obligation to kill them. Opponents of the death penalty, often called abolitionists by themselves as well as us, attack it principally these days on two grounds. Number one is that we might mistakenly execute the innocent. Number two is that it's racially biased. So let's take them one by one. Executing the innocent. We do not know for a fact that we have executed even one innocent person. We suspect we have. We probably have. Many fewer than the abolitionists claim, but we probably have. I don't know who it is, but it's horrifying that we have, if we have, and we probably have. So then the question becomes, first of all, is that a price worth paying? The ratio is enormous. The tolerance for error is extremely small, and should be smaller still with the death penalty than with any other punishment. But it isn't zero. We do make a sacrifice of possible, the remote possibility of innocence in order to accomplish justice in the vast majority of the cases. The apparent racial disparity in the death penalty, which is real insofar as 11 or 12% of the population seems to occupy 40 or 45% of death row, while real, is much more subtle than racism itself. Could be radically reduced by redefining what crimes constitute the worst of the worst of the worst. And a number of other changes could be made, which would radically reduce the apparent disparity without eliminating the death penalty itself.
My name is Steve Greenwald. I'm a lawyer in New York. And I am someone who has practiced in the death penalty area. For the last 20 years or so, I have represented people who are sentenced to death in what are called habeas proceedings, meaning on appeal after the death sentence has been applied or to the individual. As a result of my studies generally, and in particular my work in the death penalty area, I'm firmly opposed to the death penalty, and I think it should be abolished in the United States. There are numbers of reasons for abolition, in my opinion, and I'll just stress some of the most important ones from my point of view. One is that if we look at the overall punishment regime in the United States, both at the federal level and at the state level, and we compare it to punishment regimes in other parts of the world, we can see that the United States has among the harshest, if not the harshest, criminal justice system from a standpoint of sentencing and punishment of any other democratic country in the world. So we ask the question, why or do we have such a severe criminal justice system? In my opinion, a part of the reason is that we have the death penalty, because the death penalty to me is a capstone to the criminal justice system, since it's, by its own terms, the most severe and final sort of punishment that's possible. And if you have the death penalty, as we do, in my view, it sets a precedent, if you want to call it that, or a tone for the rest of the criminal justice system. So I believe that if we can abolish the death penalty, as I think it should be abolished, that could lead to sentencing reform generally and bring us more in line with what other democratic countries are doing. All the studies that have been done, almost all the studies that have been done, show clearly that the death penalty is not a deterrent. And frankly, that's something I can speak to from experience, because I've represented numbers of people on death row over the years, and I've also met with and interviewed other people on death row, and I can tell you that deterrence would not be a factor in any of the crimes that these people committed. Third, the application of the death penalty in the United States is completely unequal and unfair in terms of along racial lines and along economic lines and other dimensions. Another attribute or defect, as I see it, in the capital punishment system is the likelihood of error being made. The wrong person. We've seen over the last 15 or 20 years since the Innocence Project was first established, something in the range of about 150 individuals who have been exonerated from death sentences because errors were made during the trial or in the investigation that led to the trial. I think we have to get rid of the death penalty once and for all.
And that was the debate. So there you go, man.
Which one did you agree with more, Andrew?
The first gentleman, I think his name is Robert Bleckard.
I think so too. I mean, I actually kind of agree with him more myself, but
yeah, no, there's a very real and genuine type of person that is just a monster. Like there are people in this world that are just horrible, bad, messed up people, and if they are the murdering, raping type, then yeah, I don't want you on this planet. I don't want you near me, my family, or any of my compatriots. None of that. You got to go. And that is something I stand by, and he clearly stands by it as well.
Yeah.
I do understand very much, though, the other gentleman's point of view.
So do I.
Yeah. And it's definitely something worth seeing. Again, on the link below and YouTube, there is a link within that video to the full debate.
Yeah.
That's just like the little preview debate.
Kind of just like a little snippet of it.
Yeah, we're trying to entice you guys to go take some time and learn more about it, and then email us and tell us what you think, and let's generate a discussion. We're trying to do a community type conversation about this. It's a very important thing to talk about in today's world. So when you do go see all these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. Don't forget to email us at callingoutcontroversy@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe at our Instagram, or like and follow, I guess, because it's Instagram. Don't forget to hit up the WVCR website. Don't forget to listen to WVCR 88.3 FM, The Saint. And don't forget to call Monty at exactly 2:30 on a Monday or Tuesday. That's when you're most likely to get him in person, because other times he's just so focused on the show. He's a little more lax on Mondays and Tuesdays, a little more open to phone calls.
It's the perfect time for him to escape in the afternoon.
Always call the station at around 2